Chipped ham and football. That's what Pittsburgh does. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Brian Batko with you, as always, from the Post-Gazette. Going to do something a little bit different on today's show. For the first time, going to just do a reader mailbag with questions I've gotten. I was off last week, so I didn't do a normal mailbag, and thus I've got a lot of stuff piling up. And between that and really not a lot happening right now before OTAs begin a week from today, I figured, why not we just get to some lingering questions, get to some thoughts of the readers, get to some of what's on your guys' mind. We've never done that here on this show, so I figured, why not? We got to kind of invent something to talk about at this point in the NFL calendar anyway, so might as well engage with you all while we do it. And as always, this show is brought to you by Pella. No better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and your budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started planning your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. All right, with that, let's get to the solo mailbag show here from Chipped Ham and Football. No guest, just me. Let's get to it. All right. Like I said, got plenty of questions here from the masses, and we'll go ahead and start with this one from Joe Z, who wants to ask about probably the only real interesting contract extension question this offseason for the Steelers. Here is the question from Joe. Is it really worth it to sign Freiermuth? Pat Freiermuth, obviously. My unpopular decision would be emphatically no. I like Muth for what it's worth, but not to a contract where he earns $10+ million over the next 3 to 4 years. Muth is a liability as a blocker and in the running game. Besides, and possibly more important, Arthur Smith had an extremely talented tight end in Kyle Pitts, who was underused in his last offense. Smith basically ignored one of the most talented players on his last team. Last but not least is Muth's concussion history added all up, and it's a hard pass for me. Curious as to your thoughts. Joe, thanks as always for reading and reaching out. I completely disagree with you on this one. I think Pat Freiermuth is a very reasonable extension candidate for the Steelers, and I'm not saying give him crazy money, but it's a position that's starting to get paid a little bit more in recent years. Certainly not going to put Freiermuth into the class of tight ends with George Kittle, Travis Kelce, or anybody like that. But I think he's been very reliable for you when he is on the field. The injury stuff, of course, is unfortunate. I think that would be baked into any extension you do with him, and thus his asking price for himself. But I'll tell you right now, Taysom Hill is making $10 million a year for the Saints. Granted, he's not a typical tight end. Throw him out if you want. Noah Fant's making $10.5 million per year. Dalton Schultz is making $12 million per year. Cole Kmet got $12.5 million from the Bears when they extended him, which I think was an odd deal at the time, maybe an overpay, but he was coming off a big year in production touchdown wise. I think Freiermuth, he's in with that group now. Dawson Knox, the Bills got him for a little bit of a steal at just under $10 million annually. You always got to factor in inflation with any position, and players kind of trying to get that, next one up, bump up. But I would do in the 10 to 12 million a year range for Pat Freiermuth. I really would. He's been productive when he's out there. The Arthur Smith offense, I wouldn't use that as a detractor for this argument. I think it sometimes gets a little bit too much of a narrative rather than reality with what he was able to do with Kyle Pitts. I know it was frustrating for fantasy owners that Pitts wasn't more productive with Atlanta, but the fact of the matter is he runs so much tight end centric stuff. Pitts had over 1,000 yards receiving as a rookie when Matt Ryan was his quarterback. Yeah, he fell off the next couple years, but the quarterback play wasn't as good either down in Atlanta. And, he was hurt his second year. He had 110 targets, 90 targets last season. So I think some of that stuff gets overblown with Smith, and you don't sign an offensive coordinator, hire an offensive coordinator and expect it to be only a 1-year thing. So, I think Freiermuth is very much a part of the present in the future for the Steelers. And the last thing I'll say about it, while the injuries are a concern, what's not a concern is he's just a guy who gets it. And if Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin are drafting guys from winning cultures and trying to establish that team first mentality again here in Pittsburgh, I remember after that second Bengals game last year at home where Freiermuth put up a goose egg stat line, 0 for 0 on 0 targets. And he just said it doesn't matter to him. He will try to block his butt off. And to your point, Joe, I think he's gotten better at that over the last, handful of games from last season. We know it's never been his strength, but I do think he's putting in the time and the effort to improve in that aspect. He's going to have to if Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren remain the focal points. But, he's not a me first type of player. I think he's a guy you win with. I think he's somebody who appreciates being a Steeler. I think he's one of the good ones. So for a lot of reasons, I would be all for a new deal for Pat Freiermuth. Nothing outlandish, but I don't know that he's looking for that either. He knows he hasn't stayed healthy enough. So I think the Steelers will ultimately work it out with him. So I would disagree with your question there on Freiermuth. As we get into OTAs and then mandatory mini camp, sometimes that results in some movement, but that's also one that, that might linger into training camp. That might even go up to week 1, given that that's their natural deadline for working out new deals. All right, next question. As the birds are chirping behind me here in Shaler. This one, Keith in Atlanta, also a frequent contributor to the mailbags. With the 20th pick, should the Steelers have taken the first cornerback versus the 6th tackle? Would have been a great bookend to Joey Porter for a decade. Once again, I'm going to say no. No, I did not have an issue with the Troy Fautanu pick over, say, Nate Wiggins or Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. I know a lot of people, and myself included, thought the Steelers would very much be interested in Cooper DeJean out of Iowa. So, the fact that they did pass on all of those guys, Terrion Arnold from Alabama was another one who went a few picks later to the Lions. I don't have a problem with that, mainly because I think Joey Porter Jr., as well as he played as a rookie and as fast as he was able to take to life in the NFL, and Mike Tomlin trusting him enough to follow opponents' number 1 wide receivers, both sides of the field, he basically makes your second corner a little less valuable of a position to your defense and your team. Don't get me wrong, everybody wants 2 great corners, because then what's the team going to do? You got to throw at somebody who's locked down, but everybody wants great players at every spot. So you've also got to try to do that at wide receiver, at tackle in this case, at guard, at center. Those positions took priority for the Steelers over finding a young running mate for an already young star in the making, it looks like to me, in Joey Porter Jr. So, Darius Rush, Corey Trice, those are some young players who ideally they will make a push in training camp to be that other starter. If not, in the safer, more conservative option would probably be Dante Jackson, who came over from Carolina in the Deontay Johnson trade. He's been there, done that at the NFL level, regardless of if it's him or if it is one of the young avatar corners. Ryan Watts, the 6th round draft pick this year, I tend to think that Steelers might view him more as a safety. We'll find out once he gets out there with the rest of the team. But regardless of who it is, because of Joey Porter Jr.'s presence, you don't need to ask them to do quite as much. You can give them more safety help. They're inherently going to be covering a lesser receiver than who Joey Jr.'s on. So no, that's why I was not pounding the table for a corner. When you frame it as 6th best offensive lineman in the draft versus 1st best corner, I get it. But, I don't know that was their reasoning or their thinking. You've got to have 2 tackles out there at all times as well. And, I wouldn't have gone with any of those corners that you mentioned or that you would mention as 20th overall pick instead of Troy Fautanu. So, no, I think they did the right thing there. Okay, next question. We'll do a couple more here. This one's from Bobby B. Yo, Bobby B. He's always emailing me good ideas, good questions. He says, the more I think about Fields and his freakish athletic ability, does it not make sense to attempt to ask him if he's willing to use it at wide receiver 2? That's the banner that's on the bottom if you're watching on YouTube. Bobby's got a lot more to his idea here. He says, obviously, I'm aware that suddenly changing positions often isn't the best idea, but the guy most certainly has the tools. In doing so, the Steelers keep him engaged playing football and learning the new offense, enjoying the benefit of firsthand reads of Russell's decision-making, passing choices, and Arthur Smith's revamped route trees. How could this not improve him in an eventual QB role? To me, it seems to make perfect sense and carries far less risk than throwing him in as a returner. It also solves a problem of overpaying for a proven star receiver. That is putting a lot on Justin Fields potentially playing wide out. I appreciate the ingenuity, Bobby, and I'm with you that using Justin Fields as a kick returner, I don't actually think that that's a realistic scenario for the Steelers. I think Jaylen Warren threw it out there pretty jokingly on Cam Hayward's podcast, and he even referenced Danny Smith as being the one who brought that up. And I imagine that was more of just all those guys sitting in the special teams meeting and Danny Smith coming in with his gum and like, hey, we're going to put Justin Fields back there. We're going to put Justin Fields back there and see what he can do. Y'all guys can't run with the ball. Like, so I don't think that was a finely tuned meeting of they're going to kick it to Justin. He's going to throw back across the field to Cordero Patterson. He's going to have a wide open lane, and we're going to break football. Former Pitt quarterback Max Brown, who was one of my favorite people I covered on that beat, did a video on his, I think you can find it at his Twitter, Max Brown 4. He has an E at the end of Brown. He does great analysis of not just the NFL, but college football. He's always thinking outside the box. He had a kind of a diagram of how it could revolutionize kick returns. I don't think that's going to happen. I would just probably kick it to the other guy. And now you're down a blocker because you're not going to ask Fields to do that. I don't think he's going to play wide receiver either for the Steelers. To me, you can keep him engaged. You could utilize his athleticism in the traits that Bobby mentions by having a sub package for him where he comes in for Russell Wilson at quarterback. And yeah, I mean, there's inherently going to be more of a designed rushing ability threat with him in there than 36-year-old Russ. So, I mean, I think that is feasible for Justin Fields. I don't think lining him up out wide, asking him to beat NFL corners, asking him to learn the nuances of that position. You know, you can still get knocked in the mouth playing wide receiver in this league. I shouldn't age Russ. He will be 36. You can still get knocked in the mouth playing wide receiver in this league too. So no. And plus Justin Fields, like, I know you've got to be a volunteer, not a hostage, but that's a real good way to get on the bad side of one of your quarterbacks by saying, hey, why don't you go learn wide receiver instead of getting these valuable reps with the offense? That's how little we think there's a chance of you being thrown in under center this year or earning the job, because we're going to have you go learn a completely different position. So, yeah, I mean, I know Bobby was just kind of basing that half-baked idea off of the Justin Fields kick return chatter that dominated Steelers Twitter for a little bit there. But no, the guy's, he's a quarterback. He's trying to make it as a quarterback at the NFL level. And I still think there's a chance he could do that. So I don't think you're going to see him lining up at the X or the Z, even in a part-time role at all. So no, I'm going to go ahead and roll that one out. Man, 3 questions and 3 that I've kind of shot down. We'll get to 1 or 2 more here, depending on the timing. And let's go to the next one now from Ted W. Maybe more of a comment than a question, but I like it and I like where it can go. Ted W. says, that was a great interview with you as host and with your guest, John Rhys Plumlee. On first impressions, he's a person one can root for. He's a positive guy. He will also scratch and claw to play in the NFL. If John Rhys performs very well and even plays better than Wilson or Fields or Allen, does he get a bona fide chance of becoming the QB3? John Rhys Plumlee he's about as interesting of an undrafted free agent quarterback as the Steelers could have brought in. We got to see him up close and personal a little bit in rookie minicamp over the weekend. But for somebody like him, I'll be more curious to see how many reps does he get in OTAs, how many reps does he get in training camp. Is he somebody who will get an extended audition in the preseason? Because I think the way he plays the quarterback position as somebody who's very mobile, very athletic, played wide receiver, talk about Justin Fields playing wide receiver with the last question. There's probably another guy in that same position group more likely to switch to receiver in the NFL than Fields, and that being Plumley, who did it at Ole Miss for a season. I mean, it's probably a situation where he's not going to look the best dropping back, throwing against air, throwing in drills, those controlled settings. But when you put him in a live situation where he can try to make defenders miss, try to run away from rushers, try to extend plays with his feet, and maybe even run a guy over. That's where I think John Rhys Plumlee becomes sort of intriguing, and I think if provided he sticks around, I think he can make the preseason games a little bit more interesting. That's it depends how much he's going to play. I think they'll want to see a lot of Justin Fields in those games, assuming Russell Wilson probably gets a series in each, maybe a series or 2 or 3. But with him being in quote unquote pole position, as Mike Tomlin has said many times, that's going to be your opportunity to kind of gauge Fields and his readiness of just the overall trajectory of the quarterback competition. But yeah, I mean, Kyle Allen was signed as the veteran third quarterback in the offseason. Vet minimum deal, cost them nothing to move on from him. You could probably bring him back on the practice squad. And, I think it makes sense to have a guy like that who's been around and seen a lot and, been Josh Allen's caddy. It helps to have that set of eyes in the room, but, does it really matter having him on the active roster? Plumlee might be somebody who brings a little bit more to the equation in that sense. So yeah, I give Plumlee a real chance of getting that QB3 job. As somebody brought up in my chat Monday, will there even be a QB3 on the 2024 Steelers? Because the NFL tweaked that emergency quarterback role that you can now have that player be elevated from the practice squad as one of the emergency quarterbacks. So, I mean, it's still something that the Steelers might kind of cling to their tradition there. But yeah, I mean, Plumlee, he should be fun to watch, relatively speaking, more so than Kyle Allen, who's been in the NFL, and he's just a guy, albeit one who's good to have in the locker room. All right, last question comes from Sean M. Sean says, he got this to me after the draft, but I'm just getting around to it now. Says, I like what the Steelers are doing to rebuild the offensive line. However, having potentially 3 players at new positions, Jones at left tackle, Frazier at center, Fautanu at right tackle, is a lot of change, and NFL lore says O-lines need time to develop chemistry. In addition, the entire offense needs to learn Arthur Smith's system. Wondering if you think it will take the O-line, the skill guys, and coaches some time to get on the same page. Lots of potential with this offense, but perhaps it will take some time to come together, maybe weeks 6 through 10 before this group fires on all cylinders. Yeah, and you didn't even mention new quarterback, Sean. So, obviously everybody who does come back from 2023, players and coaches, are also getting to learn Russell Wilson and Justin Fields as they get adjusted to life as Steelers. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a very fair point. And, it's every team in the NFL has changed from one year to the next, but there's very little continuity with the Steelers offense. That's probably a good thing when you look at what they've done on that side of the ball the last couple years. But, you've got George Pickens, Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Pat Freiermuth, and, a few linemen as the holdovers. Other than that, yeah, you're going to be relying on a lot of young guys. I wrote about Roman Wilson on Monday and how he's, the ideal kind of, you want him to step up as that wide receiver too, more so than a Van or Quez Watkins, in the veterans that they signed this offseason for that group. If you can get the Pickens-Wilson combo right away, that helps. But I'm also not, expecting that they're going to be, AB Juju from the start. The offensive line, yeah, as much as everybody, myself included, given the Steelers A's in the draft for landing Fautanu and Frazier in back-to-back rounds, a lot of people didn't think they would be able to get that equation to work with a top tackle and a top center. So you expect both can start right away, but it would probably be a little bit irrational to not think there could be some growing pains. I think back to the 2021 draft, Najee Harris coming in, Freiermuth, Kendrick Green, Dan Moore, the latter of those two sort of somewhat unexpected starters right away. And the Steelers took a leap of faith that O-line would be good enough, and it wasn't. They were overwhelmed a lot of the time. So they did eventually, come together enough to make the playoffs, but it wasn't always pretty, to say the least. So there's been a lot of change on offense from the Steelers from year to year in recent seasons. Ben was learning kind of a lot of new receivers in 2019 after Antonio Brown was dealt to the Raiders. In 2020, Ben was coming back from injury, so that took some getting acclimated to. 21, Matt Canada was coming in as your offensive coordinator. 22, new quarterback, Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett. There should have, continuity was kind of the saving grace of last season. I think a lot of us at this time a year ago were saying Kenny Pickett and company have no reason not to hit the ground running. That's why you brought Matt Canada back for a third season. And we saw that didn't happen either. So maybe, having a veteran like Russell Wilson and somebody who's been, running an offense for the past 5 seasons, and Arthur Smith, they'll know how to work out some of those adjustment challenges quickly. But yeah, I mean, the young guys don't necessarily know what they're getting into at this level. It probably helps that you drafted some older rookies who were very experienced. You didn't get a Broderick Jones type in the first round, certainly an Amarius Mims, who ended up going to the Bengals before the Steelers picked Troy Fautanu. Somebody like that would have had even a steeper learning curve, I suppose. So yeah, I mean, those are reasonable statements for Sean to make there. I don't think anybody will have the patience for week 6, let alone weeks 9 or 10, for this thing to start gelling. But yes, I think it's important to remember, despite some of the excitement around the offense right now with what they've invested into it, this defense might have to do a lot of the heavy lifting right off the bat. They've got a lot more of the incumbents returning and a lot more of the star power on this team to begin with. So yeah, I mean, maybe I can do a deeper dive at some point on, teams replacing that many starters on the offensive side of the ball with a new coordinator, how they tend to fare. But that's probably a good tee up for OTAs. Maybe we'll talk about that later in the week on the North Shore Drive with Chris Carter, or he and Ray will. That this is going to be a pretty pertinent OTAs period as far as significance of OTAs goes, So we'll get a chance to preview that until those kick off next Tuesday. We're in a little bit of a lull right now. I'm sure players will start trickling back into town any day now. Thanks as always for checking us out. Thanks to everybody who has asked me questions via email, Twitter, chats, what have you. Hopefully we can get to more throughout the rest of this week, but appreciate you finding us here on the Chip Tammon Football Show. Hopefully you were able to put up with me. I know there's a lot out there to watch. We'll be back with a guest next week, but figured the mailbag episode, it would be a good time for that. So appreciate you tuning in. As always, I'm Brian Batko. We'll be back Wednesday with the North Shore Drive, and make sure you're checking out all of our other shows, podcasts, stories, everything we're doing here at the Post-Gazette. OTAs right around the corner. 4 straight weeks of vaguely football things happening on the South Side that we will be covering in full force. We'll see you next time. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of the week.